So,
that's better than nothing.
Yeah. Why don't you bring him on, just like you did in the old days of the round table?
Brenden Nunes, rising star in Sacramento, our digital editor extraordinaire. Brenden, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Exciting time. A lot going on, in different aspects, but specifically in the NBA trade deadline world. There's a lot going on.
Did you think there would be more going on with the Kings? Will there be more going on with the Kings before the deadline?
I don't really think so at this point. There's certainly, things that can change quickly, as is always the case with these things, but the way that Toronto has moved on from, I think moving on from Ochai Agbaji, funnily enough, is a lot of the matching salary that was talked about in the Domantas Sabonis trade. Obviously, Anthony Davis ends up going to Washington. That's the only other team that we heard linked to Domantas Sabonis up to this point. Maybe there's a DeMar DeRozan buyout sort of thing, but I tend to think that when you see one side, the conflicting reports with that sort of stuff, and you see one side come out and say, hey, that's in the cards, and then you see Anthony Slater come out, who's very connected to the Sacramento Kings, say that's not the case. To me, that feels like, other teams trying to diminish the value of DeMar DeRozan, and the Kings responding by being like, yeah, hold your horses, essentially. So I think that it wouldn't surprise me if this is all that's happened because, as has been the conversation this whole time, there's not that much value for a lot of these guys that the Kings have.
Mm-hmm. I know you've written about it, but what do you make of the trade the Kings did make, bringing in DeAndre Hunter, who makes his debut tonight?
He does. I'm excited to see how it looks. It seems like Scott Perry's a guy that's pretty high on him. Obviously, going back to the draft, Scott Perry with the Knicks at the time, picking third. DeAndre Hunter ends up going fourth. That was very much a three-player draft, and it was interesting to hear DeAndre Hunter at practice yesterday say that he's actually never spoken to Scott prior to joining the Kings, obviously, but Scott expressed that it's somebody that he's been high on for a while. So to me, that feels like the key part of this, right? Sure, older, I don't personally really see the vision that much. I do think that part of the logic of not paying Keon, right, was, well, why would the Kings pay a role player when they're the worst team in the league? And then they go and trade him for a role player. Now, I do think they deserve some credit for, as much as, you can bash on them for the Dennis Schroeder signing, and I think it is very deserved because obviously Keon's contract ends up being a sweetener to get off of that. I'll give them a little bit of props for recognizing the mistake and admitting it, because I think there's a lot of teams around the league that would wait too long and be like, no, this was our guy. Like Scott came out and said, this is the number one guy we wanted in the offseason. And that's all relative to who was available, obviously. But I will say, at least this is silver lining, very much so. Credit to them for admitting their mistake quickly and being willing to move on.
Yeah, and the Dennis Schroeder thing, I know we've discussed it before. I'm glad that the DeAndre Hunter thing doesn't make sense to people, because it felt like at first it didn't make sense, and then we took a second and we said, all right, maybe we're not understanding this. But now that other teams have made moves that make more sense, it feels like our initial feeling of the DeAndre Hunter, well, if he plays well, we can flip him in a year or so, and maybe they can. But yeah, the DeAndre Hunter thing, to me, when you see what Jared McCain just went for, and Jared McCain, 21 years old, Keon, 26, but Jared McCain had been buried a little bit. I think the Sixers found the perfect team and the perfect time frame to move Jared McCain, but it feels like a lot of people, that was best case scenario for Keon. So to not even say, well, we got 2 seconds, and seconds these days are playing a lot more because of the collective bargaining agreement, we landed on a 28-year-old DeAndre Hunter, who I like, but just here, I don't know. It's like a buffet, and this buffet has been very random in Sacramento so far, but it's like a buffet. It's Asian-inspired. Then you get to the end of it, and there's a pizza, and you're wondering, oh, I like pizza, but I didn't expect that to be here in this buffet.
Yeah, we got orange chicken on the pizza.
Yeah,
what's going
Somebody's
on
been
here?
listening to Carmichael Dave too much.
Yeah, a lot of food references.
Yeah.
A lot of food references.
I got a DM today from someone saying, I just want you to know that it's 7 a.m. and Dave was talking about, it was shucking oysters.
That checks out. Yeah, I mean, to me, funnily enough, DeAndre Hunter feels like Harrison Barnes all over again, like a younger version of Harrison Barnes. I do think that his defense is overstated for the most part for people that haven't watched him super closely.
I agree with that.
And Cleveland specifically, they need perimeter defense, right? And that's part of the reason they go out and get Keon Ellis. That's why that DeAndre Hunter gets moved from their starting lineup in place of Jalen Tyson. And Jalen Tyson's been playing amazingly, credit to him for sure and all of that. But I think that DeAndre Hunter, to me, is more of an offensive piece than a defensive. Again, to the Harrison Barnes comp, I think that's the type of defense you're talking about. It's nice to have a 6'8 guy, 7'2 wingspan, good in isolation, I would say, but similar to HB. Once a screen hits, it's not great screen navigation. There's not exactly rim protection that you're getting or help side defense. I think he can tend to fall asleep a little bit in some of those aspects, but he's a pretty good offensive player that can put up maybe 18 a game, and if you let him spread his wings a little bit more, maybe you can rekindle some value. I think if you manage to then sign him to a more team-friendly deal or just something lesser than what he's going for right now, then that's maybe where flipping could come into play. You guys were talking to, I'm forgetting, you talked to so many people recently.
We have.
And somebody else mentioned, shout out Anthony, I think it was Michael Scotto maybe that mentioned the idea of rekindling his value, or Yossi that mentioned it. And so I think that there's a world where, unfortunately, you do kind of have to TBD this a little bit and see what eventually comes.
That.
I know.
He doesn't like that.
I don't blame him because I, can go back to our roundtable days of me sitting here and constantly being like, hey, we got to wait and see for Monty McNair.
Right.
And I learned from that of, well, at some point you got to do something.
Yeah.
But I do think that this is a different scenario because when you're a team that's trying to go from good to great, I think you have a stricter timeline. When you're the worst team in the NBA, you don't really need to rush.
Yeah. Brenden Nunes joining us. You know what's sobering about DeAndre Hunter and his defense? He's not a great defender, but he does improve them defensively, doesn't he? He actually makes them better, even though he's not a great defender.
Yeah, not a great defender, but I think he's going to look pretty good on the Kings because it's all relative, right?
Yeah.
The Kings are 28th in defensive rating. They don't have these sort of wings, and I think they really struggle when Keegan Murray's not out there. How many times have they run 3-4 guard lineups where DeMar DeRozan or Zach LaVine is at the 4, Neat Clifford's playing your 3? I think just having more size. For example, you play the Golden State Warriors, and this is where I do think there is some cohesion and potential defensive chemistry with Keegan. Keegan can guard the shiftier perimeter players, right? You can put him on a Steph Curry. Now, he's not going to be a lockdown guy. I don't think he's the most ideal player to put on Steph Curry, but you can do that. And then the question's like, well, then who's guarding Jimmy Butler, assuming health for the Golden State Warriors using this example, right? That's where you can insert a DeAndre Hunter. Right now, you don't have a great answer. How many times is DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine on these sort of guys? Yeah, precious, but I think you get more offense out of DeAndre Hunter, right? You're not sacrificing as much on the other end of the floor. Yeah. To your point, Whitey, I think, funnily enough, even though I'm not super high on him defensively, and when Doug comes out and says, hey, I think he's like Keegan, can sort of switch 1 to 4, I'm a little bit like, I don't know about all that.
Yeah, he can, but
but he's going to go
Why
well.
do we have to get so carried away with these guys, right?
I agree. I think, you're going to hype up your guys. I get it to an extent, but I'll pump the brakes on the defense a little bit. But to your point, I very much agree that relative to the point that the Kings were already at, I think it's certainly a defensive improvement. And, for what it's worth, I think when you are developing young talent, the whole idea coming into this year is, hey, we're trying to establish a culture, right? And you want to put them in scenarios. Now, the culture they've established, I don't think has been very good this year, but you do want productive scenarios for these young players to be in order to continue to develop their game. And DeAndre could help with that. I'm trying to present their logic and admittedly not a huge fan of the move myself.
Now it gets to a point. It gets to a point, Brenden, and we've been asking everybody this.
Oh, here we go.
It gets to a point where, look, let's say they're unable to move Domantas Sabonis and they're going into next season. What if the season is flipped and the beginning of their season is much softer than it was this season? How worried are you if they still have DeMar, and obviously they're still going to have Zach LaVine, and DeAndre Hunter does make them better, and Keegan comes back, and they aren't able to move Domantas Sabonis? That hybrid rebuild starts to pop up there. You mess around. You look
love
up.
that word.
I'm just saying. I got to hit a quota especially whenever we have a guest. So you look up 20 games in, the Kings are the 6th seed right now, right? It's early on in the season.
Wow, they've won 11 of 20.
Right, and literally, how worried would you be that the Kings would say, hey, well, maybe we have something here? The example that we've been using is basically they're the 8 seed. It's December, and Domantas Sabonis has been playing his butt off, and now they can make a move. But you're looking at the 8 seed right now. You're the Phoenix Suns right now. Do they hit the eject button and go get 2 firsts for Domantas Sabonis, or do they say, whoa, hold on. Well, we're in the playoffs right now. How worried are you about that situation if they can't move some of these guys?
I think that is my larger concern. Like when you see the DeAndre Hunter trade, I'm like, okay, are they trying to be decent again next year? Because I think that would be a problem. Like I think that the wording I've been using is I think they need to embrace the suck. Like look around and accept reality. You are the worst team in the league. Like, this is not hypothetically, hey, they're just playing bad. They are the worst team in the league. The Washington Wizards were trying to lose that game. Their closing lineup was insane that they were rolling out there, and the Kings couldn't win that game. No Domas, no Keegan. You can go down the line. Bunch of guys, that's Keon not available, all these guys not available that just got moved on from. But to me, it does make me concerned, and they're still linked to John Morant a little bit. Like, to me, that's the wrong way to go about it. I think that you're betting too much on the player that you get in this draft is your franchise player, because that's what you need, right? And I get they're trying to free up cap space for 2027, right? My question is, for what? You're not signing the Giannis, the Steph that's available that offseason, right? In my mind, the value of cap space is so that you can do some of these. That way you can take on a Jakob Poeltl for multiple draft picks if you're a bad team, right? When you're in Sacramento's position, I think that's the sort of thing that you should be trying to do. Yeah. Exactly. Be the third team in deals. I think Chicago is doing it really well this offseason, actually. That's how they, even going back, that's how they got Josh Giddey. Now they're taking a flyer on Jaden Ivey.
Memphis has set themselves up so that they can do that if it benefits them.
Very much so. I think Brooklyn is sort of in that scenario a little bit right now. Milwaukee probably will end up in that scenario when they move on from Giannis eventually, whether that's deadline or probably more likely this offseason. So that is a larger concern of mine, and I do worry that is the DeAndre Hunter trade a sign of they are trying to remain competitive going into next season? Because I do think that would be a flawed process.
Okay, that's part of the answer then to this question, but you mentioned Brenden Nunes with it. You said, I'm not a huge fan of the move myself, and I think that's one reason why, but tell us more about why the DeAndre Hunter trade doesn't do a lot for Brenden Nunes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what's the real value of adding a role player to this team, to be honest? And I think that you should be trying to take flyers on players that are
like Jarris
have
Walker.
More potential upside. Right. I love a Jarris Walker idea, for example, right? I don't know. Apparently, he's been mentioning Jarris Walker a bunch. He looked over at you after that one.
Yeah.
I don't know about like a Tijon Salone or anything like that.
Like a mic drop. When you said Jarris Walker, he thinks it's like a mic drop for him.
Yeah.
That's a guy.
I mean, I think that is more so the right idea, right? The Jaren Jackson Jr. trade, like getting a Walter Clayton back in that deal, for example. And I think that just maybe they can rekindle value for DeAndre Hunter, eventually flip him for something else. But a lot of it for me is who's going to be on the next good Kings team. And I don't think it's DeAndre Hunter. Right. Maybe this is a guy that came into the league a little bit later, 3 years at college, redshirted his first year at Virginia. So there's less NBA mileage. Maybe he'll last later into his career than some people assume. But I just don't think that there's that much value in currently getting role players on a team that's not very good. I don't think that they should be trying to figure out, hey, well, we have these pieces and we're lacking this, so how can we clean that up a little bit? Yeah. Because right now, the only guys that we feel confident are probably going to be here are Keegan, Max, Neek, and Dylan. And I honestly think that, none of them should be safe outside of maybe Keegan.
Yeah.
It's almost as if they decided, look, we have these players we'd like to move. No one wants them. We have to bring in guys that we can create some demand for and move them because we can't move the guys we have.
Right. We got to Ozark. We got to clean some sort of money, and we can't clean this money. It's hot over here. So we got to bring in new money in order to clean it and get that out. And that's literally what they did with Dennis Schroeder. That was the money that they could clean. They couldn't clean any of the money that they already had.
I'd be looking for like a Jalen Brunson, right? To go back to Scott Perry's New York comparison, right? When he's clearing cap space there were all these, 2-year deals with a second-year team option because they're trying to clear cap space. Well, that's because you're the New York Knicks, and they thought they might get Kyrie and KD.
Right.
Kings aren't getting stars with their free agency, right? But you could try to do a Jalen Brunson route, a Tyrese Halliburton route, right? Where, hey, we think that this guy actually has more if he's given more opportunity, and it seems like that might be the case with DeAndre Hunter, but he's certainly not your star.
Well, this is why I said the Toronto deal might not be about the Raptors and Sabonis as much as it might be about the Kings and RJ Barrett. And did Scott Perry think RJ Barrett could be that guy? Now, it doesn't look like it's going to happen, but I don't think Whitey and I believe that to be the case, but that would be a situation. I think Brunson was around the same age when he got to the Knicks. The one thing about the DeAndre Hunter deal is not just that they did the deal, but that's not what it sounded like they were planning on doing. Right? When we had these conversations specifically about Keon, it was taking a flyer on a Jarris Walker type of 22-year-old, not bringing in DeAndre Hunter. So I think that had fans also a bit confused as to, wait, I thought you were trying to get younger, and now we're looking at this saying, okay, well, it seems like the Kings have to go in a different direction because they can't move any of these contracts, so they're bringing in new contracts that they
hope to move someday.
That they hope to move. What are your thoughts on the Zach LaVine piece of this? And it came out, surprise, surprise, 49 million reasons to stay in Sacramento. How do you think that all ends?
I mean, I think when he's an expiring contracts have value no matter who it is, how much value it is, right? Say there's another player with 3 years left on their deal.
And Hunter is an expiring next season. Right?
Yes, yeah. Exactly. Say there's another guy with 3 years left on their deal and a team wants to move off of them, then there could be some sort of value. Both you guys looking at your phone makes me think some trade's going on here.
Maybe.
It's time of year,
That's right.
Actually, you've been traded, but we're not supposed to be the ones that tell you.
Yeah. I think somebody might have got traded. And I think that for the most part, that Zach becomes a lot easier to move next season, right? When he is an expiring deal. I think there's something that could potentially get done there. And even if not, you wait it out and eventually just get the money off the books, right? I don't think there's, with these guys, a reason to rush. If you can use that salary, then great, right? But I think also the fact that that's coming off the books, like in the Toronto deal, I think they should take on Jakob Poeltl. This contract is horrible. Do not get me wrong, but to the point of, hey, they're going to clear cap space in 2027, that's going to happen.
What would you need back to convince you to do that?
Probably 2 firsts.
Yeah.
I mean,
it
RJ is
like
part of the deal.
willing to do that, though,
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think so. If Colin Murray-Boyles is part of the deal, I'm doing that. Maybe without picks. I love Colin Murray-Boyles, right? Could it be Grady Dick in 1 first? Yeah. Maybe. I think there was a world where before Agbaji got moved that you could have still got the deal done without Jakob Poeltl, right? But of course, draft capital factors into that, and it would be like essentially a 4-for-1 with a third team getting involved and complicated aspects to that. But I think for the most part, there's no need to rush with Zach, and I think there could be some value in having that expiring contract that could appeal to another team that's trying to get off of salary for more years further down the line than that. And I think that's the case for a lot of these guys. For Domas, I think he's going to get more valuable in this offseason. If you're not getting a first-round pick right now, let him try to rekindle his value a little bit and see when, hey, maybe now there's only 2 years left, and does somebody want to throw a first-round pick for that and see what it's looking like? Maybe Toronto revisits it this offseason. I think the fact that we're hearing teams being interested for how polarizing of a player he is around the league, it's good to just get some confirmation of other teams that are like, hey, we think this guy could fit, and there's no reason to think that couldn't be revisited this offseason.
Brenden Nunes, to me, it could get really tricky here for the Kings the rest of the way. Obviously, they're in position where you want to end up with a top 3 pick. You want to end up, if you can, in worst place, because then, you can pick no worse than 5th. But if you keep Domas and you've got all these veterans, look, the schedule gets easier. You've got the other teams that are behind you right now in the lottery. They're going to tank hard. So I'm concerned with all the veterans you have, especially if you keep Domas. Couldn't it get really tricky to keep losing these games?
I would have thought so, but they've played so bad this year, Whitey, that I'm not really sure. But I have definitely had that thought of, like, you could see at the beginning of the year, their last month is kind of a cakewalk.
Uh-huh.
It's the most Kings thing ever to think that they're going to win too many games
Yeah.
in the last month. All of a sudden, they're going to have the third worst odds and have the possibility of dropping to, what does that put them at, like 8th, right?
Yeah.
And that'd be the worst case scenario here because you do still need your star player. I think that it's not even a guarantee. Say you get Darren Peterson. I love Darren Peterson. That's my clear number one.
Me too.
And I think he's phenomenal. He's not a guarantee. There's the injury stuff, and you just never know with some of these players. Andrew Wiggins was Maple Jordan. He was the guaranteed number one, not to just do the Kansas comp or whatever, right? But there's plenty of these. And so it's not a guarantee. That's why I think you need to be patient. You need to see and say you do a Ja Morant deal and you get your Darren Peterson. Well, now what does that mean for Peterson? Does he get to spread his wings and become a... Right now, Cooper Flagg, I think, is really benefiting from getting to play point guard, And sure, that was a rough process at the beginning of the year, but if they had still Kyrie on there, they still had Luka on there, he probably doesn't get to spread his wings in the same way. And so that's why I think that they should go about it the right way. And sure, people will constantly counter, hey, that could take 5 years. My argument would be, this team has been bad for 20, guys. Yeah. Like, at what point do you need to embrace that if you actually want to get to sustainable success, whatever that means? Now, if that means we just want to be flirting with the playoffs, then my logic goes out the window. Hey, we just want to be Portland, what Portland was with Dame and CJ. We just want to be in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Then cool. That's a different scenario than what I'm talking about. But if you're looking for a championship eventually, and that is actually towards the top of your list of goals, then I think you need to see this process out.
Yep.
Yeah, we've been going back and forth on whether or not the Ja Morant Grizzlies, whether that was sustained success or not. And I've said yes. A couple people, I think Whitey and Matt George, said no.
I would say yes.
You would say yes.
Yeah, that was a good team.
I thought so too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just the idea of, well, what are you actually trying to build towards, and what do you think is actually going to happen when you get these stars and these young players, which is why there's a bit of an argument for Ja Morant. So here's the thing, Whitey. When you have Brenden on the show, all right, and this is what you always do, you can slyly convince Brenden to give you a nugget that you did not necessarily
this guy's so funny
know before. Okay, so Brenden, what are you hearing? What are you hearing about?
That wasn't very sly. I thought you said slyly.
I know, he basically called you kind of dense.
No. I'm telling Whitey for future reference.
It's because you only can tell this guy so much, Whitey.
I'm telling Whitey for future reference. I'm sacrificing this one.
Okay.
But just real quick, what are you hearing about the Kings' interest in Ja Morant?
Nothing more than what you're probably hearing, to be honest.
You sure?
Yeah, I mean,
now he's
not
holding
much
back
with
on
Ja.
it.
Yeah.
I think there was more with the Domas stuff. Like I said, I think that there was a world where you could have got a deal done without including Jakob Poeltl, right? But do they want to include Grady Dick, for example, or could Colin Murray-Boyles be part of that? I think the latter, probably not so much. He's a really good player. I'd imagine that's part of the reason they like Domas, right? They're one of the teams, and same with Washington. Colin Murray-Boyles, kind of a rim protector and works alongside Domas. They have good length with Brandon Ingram. Alex Sarr can play a little bit of the four. He's a great rim protector. That makes sense next to Domas, right? Domas is a very unique player that I think takes a specific fit and team construction to work. With Ja, I honestly, I have not heard that much, Alan. I don't mean to disappoint you in that aspect, but I do think that the interest is real to an extent. I will say that feels very Kings ownership to me rather than front office, right? And that's just connecting tea leaves from years prior, right? Like, messaging from Scott has been that this is going to take some time. But I think that we've seen other people in the organization be a little bit impatient. And Zach LaVine is the prime example of this. Hey, this guy's pretty good, he's going to sell some jerseys, which maybe hasn't played out quite the way that they might have thought. No. But Ja definitely falls into that category, and I could end up eating crow. Maybe they end up actually being a good team, 6th seed, whatever, next year. But I think they'd probably be sitting around that 6th seed for a while. And then at what point are you right back to where you're at now? And there's some value in that, but I haven't heard that much about the Ja Morant stuff, but it feels very Kings.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I get the sense, Brenden, that some of this stuff is an example of how other teams still look at the Kings as a team that you can take advantage of. Let's talk to them. You never know what they're going to do. I don't know that for a fact, but when you hear the Kings are the only team interested in Ja, Memphis knows they think they may have a sucker on the line. On the other hand, the other side of that coin, given what we were just talking about, it's possible that Scott Perry to the point we just made. He's got these players he can't move, and he's looking for players that maybe we bring him in, reclamation project, then maybe we get something we can move. Maybe that's because we're not going to be very good for a while anyway. I mean, maybe given the organization the benefit of the doubt, maybe that's how they're looking at this.
Yeah, I think it's also the time of year you got to keep in mind like what's coming from where, and there's a reason for everything, right? It's easy for other teams to go out and tell reporters, hey, like we heard the Kings are kind of interested in what we got over here, and that's not actually coming from the Kings,
right?
Because they're trying to build up a market. And to your point, Whitey, it sounds believable, right? It's easy for people to be like, yeah, that sounds about right. That checks out. And they're trying to build up some value a little bit. I think that's where you see like conflicting reports with the DeRozan stuff like we talked about earlier. So, I think you got to take it with a grain of salt a little bit. And personally, I'm like, unless it's coming from somebody that we know is very well connected within Sacramento, an Anthony Slater, a Sam Amick, and you can go the higher ups, obviously Shams and things like that. I'm taking things with a little bit of a grain of salt, especially because we got 24 hours until the trade deadline.
Yeah, less than that now.
Yeah, I'm sorry, because I know it's Alan's turn, but I got to ask you, as you talked about higher up Shams, and you come down and you mentioned Sam, and we got Slates, and where in that scale do you put Alan Stiles, who says he's got sources?
Probably like right above Shams.
Oh, okay.
See?
Wow.
He knows.
Yeah. He's your guy.
Yeah,
maybe like on par with Brett Siegel.
Yeah, I'll take that.
Yeah.
I'll take that all day. But, Brenden, I know
No shot at Brett, by the way.
No, Brett's my guy.
They call him Alan Sittery. I don't know.
No, stop that. I know we gotta get you out of here, but yeah, your last kind of proclamations and predictions on the Kings, is this going to be the roster this time after 12 p.m. tomorrow?
I think so, but the one guy that's really interesting to me is DeMar. I think that, and this is just from my own logic because everything has been saying that nobody really is that interested in DeMar. I think he could help teams, man. And I'd be really curious that if the Kings were more competitive and in close games this season, if he got to show off his closing ability, that could intrigue some teams. Before Atlanta made their move for moved on from Trae Young, CJ McCollum, like that's a team I looked at and I'm like, hey, they kind of need a closer, and it depends how DeMar would feel about coming off the bench in certain scenarios and things like that. But I think there are teams that are competitive or flirting with competitive that could really use a guy like DeMar. So I guess I'm still partially holding on to a logic of just thinking he could help teams. And so maybe there could be something there. But for the most part, it seems like teams are not very interested in trying to do that. But to me, he could help. And it's only $10 million guaranteed next season if they just want to send us a guy that's making similar money next year, but it's fully guaranteed. Right. And all of a sudden you have an out, that maybe that could make some sense. So it wouldn't surprise me if they're done. That would be my guess. But I just think that DeMar should have value around the league, even if it doesn't seem that way.
Thank you, Brenden.
Appreciate you guys.
We always appreciate it. That's the roundtable for today. We'll come back and summarize